Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Truce tested. The US launches a new wave of strikes against Iran in response to attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, sending oil prices higher. Meanwhile, NATO says that allies have agreed $50 billion in extra spending as European leaders look to show they're strengthening their military capabilities. We're live from the summit in Ankara. And tonight, I am a candidate. I won't change my mind. A French court upholds far-right leader Marine Le Pen's conviction for misusing public funds, but clears her to run for president next year. Well, a very good morning. Those are your headlines. Did we not say yesterday that the de-escalation trade was fragile? Take a look at the markets this morning and the impact of those latest US strikes on Iran rippling through the cross-asset picture. Oil climbing by 2.7% on Brent to $76 a barrel. The dollar is trading steady at the moment now, and Treasury is pretty steady as well, though we have seen yields rising elsewhere in Asia. The 10-year now down a basis point at 4.54%. Now flip over to the equities and futures picture, and the Kospi is extending declines this morning, down 4.5%. We have seen it actually heading towards a technical bear market, so down almost 20% from its all-time high last month. SK Hynix and Samsung leading the drop despite that 19-fold surge in quarterly profit earlier this week from Samsung. Now, we're looking for a read across into the rest of the world, but actually Nasdaq futures up 0.1%. Bear in mind, though, the Nasdaq fell nearly 2% yesterday, and European futures just flat to the downside as things stand. Now, let's take a look at the risk events on the agenda for today. At 7:30 p.m. London time, we'll be getting the minutes of Kevin Warsh's first meeting as Fed chairman. We'll see whether they're shorter or whether they're less detailed given his communications overhaul. And we're also waiting for UniCredit to confirm the results of its Commerzbank tender offer. Has it crossed that 50% control threshold that would determine whether Andrea Orcel presses forward with full consolidation or indeed whether he steps back? And then to Turkey, of course, the NATO summit continues. The UK, France and Germany having already launched that $50 billion effort to develop long-range weapons without the US. Now we look ahead to the Trump-Zelenskyy meeting. So plenty on the docket. Let's get you set up for the day ahead. The fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran is facing its biggest test yet. Washington says it has completed a round of offensive strikes against Iran. The US military saying that the operation was in response to attacks on 3 commercial vessels that were transiting the Strait of Hormuz. According to a post on X by the Central Command, US forces hit over 80 targets in and near the Strait, including Iranian air defense systems, command and control networks and coastal radar sites. Let's get more now with Abir Abu Omar, who joins us as Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor. Abir, thank you so much for making time. What kind of response now should we expect from Iran to these strikes?
Good morning, Lizzie. I think we've seen a little bit of a response from Iran. We're seeing sirens in Bahrain sounding. Also, attacks in Kuwait reported. So Iran looks like it's retaliated against GCC countries, similar to actions it has taken in the past when the U.S. has retaliated to Iran ship attacks on targets. As you've mentioned, the U.S. has responded to an attack by Iran or the IRGC yesterday on a tanker that was making its way through the Strait of Hormuz. This was reported to be a Qatar-linked tanker laden with LNG that Iran says has not stuck to the route that it has laid out for ships and tankers that are making their way through the waterway. And so the U.S. response to that and three ships in total has been targeting over 80 targets, as you have mentioned, in Iran. Iran responding to that through the deputy foreign minister, saying that the retaliation by the IRGC will take a decisive shape. And so we've seen seen in the early hours of the morning attacks against targets in Bahrain and Kuwait. It's unclear if it will carry out to something a little bit more than what we're seeing so far. But Lizzie, these events overnight and into the early hours of the morning in the Middle East seem to really test the negotiations or the ongoing talks for a permanent peace deal. This does seem to be the most violent sort of occurrence that we've seen since the MOU was reached about 3 weeks ago now. We have seen skirmishes in the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen attacks by Iran on ships. A Singapore flagged ship was attacked a few weeks ago for, again, the same reason, not sticking to the routes that Iran had laid out. But this just seems to really test this ceasefire, or this temporary ceasefire that is quite fragile, has been fragile, and continues to be fragile from the looks of it.
Well, yeah, of course, the US-Iran talks are on hold for the late Supreme Leader's funeral at the moment, Abir. What could it mean for them when they pick up, given that we're back to strikes?
That's a good question. For the time being, we still don't know. We have to monitor the events throughout the day and whether Iran decides to carry out more retaliation strikes against allies in the region or against ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But you're right. I mean, this does come at a surprising time, especially because we're still witnessing the mass funeral of the late Supreme Leader in Iran. And so the IRGC attacks against ships in the Strait of Hormuz really show that Iran will do no matter what it takes to assert its dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the U.S. did not sit idle, and it did attack Iran in response to those strikes on shipments. But perhaps the other important thing here is that the U.S. Treasury said yesterday that it will revoke the clause that allows Iran to sell its oil. Now, Lizzie, if you remember, this is a main clause for Iran. Oil sanctions to be lifted on its oil sales, and so it's unclear what this whole thing means for the wider negotiations, the wider clauses, meaning the nuclear component, the frozen assets, and the Strait of Hormuz itself. For the time being, we're expecting this to be a one-off and for the talks to continue once the mourning or the mass funeral ends by the end of this week. But it's unclear. There's a lot of unclarity still about just the movement of the ships and the state of the wider negotiations. So we monitor and see just what continues to happen for the rest of the day today.
Abir, thank you so much. That's Abir Abu Omar, who'll be back with Bloomberg Horizons Middle East and Africa at 5 a.m. London time. Well, as she says, you've got crude prices moving higher this morning as those attacks on Iran have heightened the tensions in the Middle East and as the US has revoked the sanctions waiver that had allowed Tehran to be selling oil. Let's dive more deeply into the energy story now. We can speak to Bloomberg's Asia energy editor, Stephen Stapczynski. So, Stephen, from the market perspective, how does the end of Iran's oil waiver change the outlook?
You know, I think it creates a complicated matter because a lot of that oil was being sold potentially at a deep discount to secure customers. A lot of the actually buyers in Asia had replaced their flows from the Persian Gulf, and so you were seeing this sort of flood of Iranian vessels coming in. It was kind of pushing prices down further, and with the sanction waivers, it meant essentially anyone could buy that oil. Now, removing that, of course, it doesn't change the global supply-demand balance too much. Iran is basically, it was exporting about 1 or 2% of global oil supply, but now, with that off the table, it does tighten things a bit. It doesn't change the fact that the market is facing, at least in the short term, a bit of an oversupply. As I mentioned, a lot of the buyers, whether they're India, Japan, or China to a degree, had found replacements or figured out ways to not use oil at all. In China's sake, I mean, they reduced their imports quite significantly over the last few months. So the market is already kind of frothy. Removing the Iranian barrels doesn't mean that suddenly that there's a shortage. In fact, it was really just icing on the cake. So potentially you'll continue to stay in this $70 range if the Hormuz risk premium were to stay there and you're not getting those Iranian barrels to potential importers in the market. But it could also act as a bit of floating storage. You could see this build up as it's unclear who will take Iranian oil if it's sanctioned and you can't get the waivers from the U.S.
OK, well, $76 a barrel is where we trade on Brent for now, Stephen. Abir touched on this. We've seen a handful of vessels appearing to transit through the Strait in the early hours of this morning. Do you expect that to continue given the strikes?
I think that a lot more ship owners and producers are going to be cautious going forward. We did see a trickle of oil tankers going through on the Omani route even, but I think you do need to take note that it is down from where we were maybe in the early days of the U.S. Iran interim peace deal, and you have seen a pretty noticeable drop in LNG traffic as well. LNG vessels have basically stopped going through. So while some oil is getting out, you're not really seeing that for gas, and you're seeing that kind of represented in the two prices, where oil prices have dropped pretty significantly, and we're basically back to pre-war levels. Gas prices, natural gas prices in Europe and Asia are 70 or 80% higher than February levels. So it really depends on the product and the owner. I mean, while there are some ship owners and oil exporters that are willing to take the route, Qatar, the world's second largest LNG exporter, they've got a fleet of very expensive LNG vessels. One of them was hit yesterday. It looks like, at least for now, they're taking a pause to reassess the situation. And every day that LNG supply is curtailed, that puts more pressure on the LNG and gas market because it is tighter, and that will push prices higher. So right now, I think there is a lot of caution in the Strait. I don't think you're going to see an immediate rebound in traffic as long as this tit-for-tat strikes continue between the U.S. and Iran. But I do want to note that we aren't, at least for now, spiraling into the situation that we saw in March, where you saw Iran targeting oil and gas infrastructure across the region in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. They are targeting more U.S. bases and U.S. interests. As long as it sticks to that sort of situation, it's unlikely you're going to see a real uptick and surge in oil prices, because that's the fear. If there is an attack on any asset, if there's a long-lasting reduction in oil flows, then that's where we start to see oil prices tick back up to $80, $90, and even $100.
OK, Stephen, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's Stephen Stapczynski. Well, in response, we've seen bond yields rising on the renewed tensions in the Middle East, not perhaps for treasuries, but elsewhere in the world, particularly in Asia. So let's get some analysis now. We can go to Bloomberg MLive strategist David Savage. David, just talk us through how else the geopolitics is rippling through the markets this morning.
Hi, Lizzie. Yeah, I think you said it first. I mean, there's really been a tale of sort of two markets. In fixed income, we've certainly seen yields tick higher across the region, reflecting, the jump in crude prices. So Japanese yields, Australian, New Zealand yields. Of course, we had the RBNZ, raise rates earlier today. And, if you look over the last couple of days, we have seen U.S. Treasury yields move higher as well. U.S. 10-year is now up at 4.55. We've seen, the U.S. 30-year back up over the psychologically significant 5% level. And so certainly, bond yields are reflecting, the reversal in crude prices. And a part of that is because we've seen, inflation expectations, which had really been crashing lower alongside crude prices, had started to tick higher again. On the other side, equities, really are frankly not really reflecting, the moves in crude prices. If we look at the equity price action today, it's really been, dictated by, very wild swings in the Kospi. Even though we've seen, crude prices, if we look at Brent, really traded around $76 a barrel for most of the session. So, equities are much more being dictated by, the wild swings we're seeing in the Kospi and sort of the unwind we're seeing in the memory trade and the equity momentum trade.
OK, David, thank you so much. That's David Savage, Bloomberg MLive strategist. Well, still ahead, we will keep an eye on the bond space at the European Open, given the latest when it comes to far-right politics here in Europe. Tonight, I'm a candidate, says French far-right leader Marine Le Pen. Her conviction upheld, but she is cleared to enter the next presidential race. But first, a looming shadow cast over NATO's annual summit as the US carries out fresh strikes on Iran. We'll take you live to Ankara next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. So it is coming up to 6:17 a.m. here in London. We're listening to Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, speaking in Ankara at the NATO summit. He has said that the latest US attacks on Iran were absolutely necessary. He says he knows the US is disappointed when it comes to Iran, and he wants allies to confirm that Iran can never get its hands on nuclear arms. He's also touched on Ukraine. He says he expects allies to acknowledge collectively Russia's threat, and he expects allies to commit to multi-year Ukraine aid. So that's the latest from the NATO Secretary General. Let's go now to Ankara to our Bloomberg Chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, covering the summit for us. Ollie, I do have to ask you whether the US strikes in Iran are going to overshadow NATO's agenda, really whether this is Trump trying to make Iran the centre of the conversation. Ollie, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I mean, listen, it's one of the many things that's hanging over this meeting. It's a thing that's obviously impossible to ignore, in part, obviously, because it's had a very sort of large repercussion economically for most NATO members here in Europe through the effect that it's had on energy prices. But of course, because it's something that the United States has been very upset about with NATO allies for not participating in a much more active way. It's something we've heard repeatedly from Trump in the lead up to the summit. We've heard it again from him here, basically saying that he's greatly disappointed with the Europeans in terms of their impact. And you hear here Mark Rutte yet again trying to appease the President of the United States, sort of soothe things over, saying that, listen, these were necessary strikes from the United States, but really not wanting to derail the business at hand here at NATO, which is really trying to bring the focus back on Ukraine, trying to bring the focus on that NATO spending and how much has actually been achieved over the last 12 months. But as you say, Lizzie, this is one of the things that hangs over it. There's, of course, the G word that is hanging over everything, Greenland. That came up again yesterday. Trump saying that basically, the United States lays its claim once again on Greenland and should be in possession of it. But so far, it doesn't seem that these are going to cause, serious fractions within the alliance. The focus is still very much on defense spending, what the Europeans have done so far. But of course, one of the things that they cannot ignore is the threats that the United States has made about troop movements, pulling American troops out of Europe. You've already had some of those announcements, and we've had Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War of the United States, saying that they're going to do another review over the next 6 months and that they are going to potentially pull more troops out of Europe. That is a question that I put to the senior diplomat of the EU, the High Representative Kaja Kallas, and asking her whether or not the Europeans are prepared for potential troop movements from the United States. Have a listen to what she had to say.
More needs to be done, that's very clear. But we are in constant contact with NATO that all these things don't happen so that we leave a vacuum or a gap really behind. So there are troop movements inside Europe, but it doesn't affect the overall capability of defense and deterrence.
And of course, Trump has linked a number of things also to the activity in Hormuz. There has been discussions periodically about a European role there. Do you see that conversation evolving and moving forward? Or are we still at sort of where we've been over the last couple of months with that UK sort of French-led effort?
We have Operation Aspides that is currently working in the Red Sea. That is also important for the freedom of navigation, and we are ready to, also step in to escort the ships when necessary. But right now, the most important part is the negotiations, the 60 days, and there are, message to the negotiators is that there should be no tolls, no fees for the freedom of navigation.
And also thinking about these sort of respective roles of the European Union and NATO, there's been some critique in the past of the EU of duplicating efforts of NATO. We now have this big industry event here being held around NATO, which is traditionally a sort of European EU role. Do you think that there is a bit of duplication happening? Do you think that is now being reversed in the other way? And do the lines, do you think, need to be a little bit clearer in order to get sort of more effective outcomes on both ends?
We work hand in hand with NATO, really. I mean, because majority of member states in NATO are also the majority of member states in European Union. So we try to help them to fill the capability gaps that they have and the capability targets that they have from NATO. And we are exchanging information and trying to make it as easy as possible to also give our, funding tools to help our member states to actually fulfill their obligations in NATO.
And I also want to think about more broad. So some of the reflections there from the High Representative Kaja Kallas speaking yesterday on the sidelines of the NATO summit. I think the focus today will be obviously what we get in terms of the communique, what that will tell us about NATO unity, the language on Russia, the language on Iran if it's in there. And of course, the other thing that we're watching very closely for any kind of concrete outcome is that meeting a little bit later today between the President of the United States, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. What can he get out of the President of the United States? Will he get on side and will he sort of join the diplomatic effort once again to try to bring that war to a close? And of course, the main concern for the Ukrainians, practically speaking, is this question of air defense, whether or not the United States will help them out there.
Yes, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte insisting in those past few moments that the US is completely committed to NATO. Let's see how that transpires in this meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, thank you so much for your coverage. And Ollie will be live at the NATO summit throughout the day, speaking to guests, including the Belgian Foreign Minister, as well as the Estonian Prime Minister as well. Anne-Marie Hordern on the ground alongside Ollie too. Well, coming up on Daybreak Europe, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage quits as an MP and says that he'll stand in the resulting by-election. But rival parties say that they won't take part. We'll dive into that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has announced his resignation as an MP and his intention to seek a new mandate in the resulting special election. Let's get more now from Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince. Rosa, I'm sure you were watching that press conference yesterday. The main parties now say that they're not going to contest this special election. Will it mean anything if the only opposition facing Nigel Farage is a certain Count Binface?
Yes, well, he will claim that he has some democratic legitimacy from this. He will say that if he wins, that the people of Clacton, his constituency, approve of his conduct. But I think you're right. I think if he's only going to be standing against a joke candidate in the form of Mr. Count Binface, it may risk him looking at best a bit of an irrelevant sideshow this summer as we get a new Prime Minister in the form of Andy Burnham, and at worst, kind of a figure of fun as he goes head-to-head against the Binface.
Yeah, it seems like Farage was perhaps hoping to recreate the Makerfield moment that, of course, got Burnham back into Westminster. But let's say that Farage wins this by-election, as polls suggest he would, regardless of the competition. What are the next steps on the investigation into his finances, which is the root of all of this, of course?
Yeah, well, if we look past this big distraction that Farage has created, there's still a major standards investigation into his conduct, into those donations that he failed to declare. And I think that could be a moment of real problem for him. If he is found to have broken the rules, he could be suspended from the House of Commons and even face another by-election. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the parties will not be sitting that one out. And Labour, and particularly the Conservatives, will be hoping to topple him in that by-election if it happens and really end Nigel Farage's career. So a moment of high danger for Farage, who, remember, is actually leading in the opinion polls at the moment.
OK, Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince. And you can read Rosa's latest column on the terminal, as ever, at OPIN Go. Rosa, thank you very much. Well, coming up on the programme, we're going to discuss the outlook for markets amid heightened geopolitical tensions with BNP Paribas' Camille de Courcel. We'll also talk about the impact of Marine Le Pen running in France on the European bond market open this morning. So stay with us. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Truce tested. The US launches a new wave of strikes against Iran in response to attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, sending oil prices higher this morning. Meanwhile, NATO's Secretary General says that US attacks against Iran were absolutely necessary as leaders prepare for another day of meetings. We're live from the summit in Ankara. And tonight, I am a candidate. I won't change my mind. A French court upholds far-right leader Marine Le Pen's conviction for misusing public funds, but clears her to run for president next year. Well, a very good morning. If you are just joining us, 6:30 a.m. here in London, and we are looking at a picture in markets really affected by the geopolitics. So you can see oil climbing more than 3% on Brent at $76 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index pretty steady at the moment. We have seen yields higher in the Asia session. The 10-year Treasury yield steady, though, as things stand, 4.54% at the moment. Flipping over to the equities picture, and more drama coming out of South Korea this morning. The Kospi now down 5.8%, so extending its declines and heading towards a technical bear market. So it's down almost 20% from its all-time high last month. SK Hynix and Samsung leading the drop. Nasdaq futures are now in the red, down 0.1%, and Euro Stoxx 50 futures down as well, 0.2% as things stand. Now let's take a look at the front pages this morning. We'll start off with the Wall Street Journal today. They lead with the latest exchanges between the US and Iran, describing events overnight as the latest threat to that fragile ceasefire between the two countries. But here in the UK, if we flip over to the Telegraph, they're focusing on Nigel Farage's decision to call this by-election in his Clacton seat, saying that the Labour and Conservative parties deciding not to stand against him has turned his gamble into a farce. Then let's turn over to France, and Les Echos is our choice this morning. The focus, of course, on Marine Le Pen, a headline describing her as convicted but still eligible as she pledges to contest that 2027 presidential election. So, big range of stories this morning, but you can get a roundup of what you need to know, as ever, in the Daybreak newsletter, which terminal subscribers can find by going to D8YB Go. Well, we have oil ticking upwards following the latest US strikes on Iran in retaliation, as I say, for attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And that flare-up in tensions threatens a new wave of global energy market disruption, and it complicates the current outlook for inflation and interest rates. So let's bring it all together. We can speak to Camille de Courcel, Head of Developed Markets Rates Strategy and Economics Europe at BNP Paribas. Camille, always lovely to have you with us in the studio. So let's start with the geopolitics then. Oil up this morning, looking at Brent here, trading at $76 a barrel. How vulnerable is the de-escalation trade when we see strikes like this? And how live does it keep the central bank meetings that are coming up?
I think it's a very good demonstration of why central banks had to remain very cautious because, yes, on the one hand, it was very good news, oil supply coming back more rapidly than most people would have expected. But on the other hand, it was never going to be, smooth sailing. And last night is a very good demonstration of that. So I think it just showed that oil prices, can remain higher. There is no return to pre-war levels. And on top of that, looking at, product prices, in any case, they had already completely diverged from oil prices. So I think that's why central banks have remained very cautious. Looking at, for example, the ECB, even the most speakers' tone has remained fairly hawkish, even when most of the factors were good news.
You say that a second ECB hike's still on the table. It's not just about showing that June wasn't just an insurance hike. How much is it about second-round effects on top of the geopolitics?
Yes, so I think already you've seen some indirect effects, which is also quite important. Second-round effects typically will take a bit of a while to really materialize and become visible. We may get some first signals by the September meeting, which would give reassurance to the ECB that they need to go. But I think it's fair to say that appetite to deliver another one is still fairly strong. And again, it would be just going back to 250, which is the top of the range of where neutral is, so it's fairly easy to deliver. So appetite, I think, is still very strong. Conviction might be a bit less, but it will depend a lot on the evolving situation.
And what about the Fed? Because, of course, we get the minutes tonight. I wonder if you came out of Sintra thinking that Kevin Walsh was a dove or a hawk, and also really how much weight you put on those jobs numbers last week.
Yeah, so I think we need to understand that we won't probably learn much from Wash on his stance on the economy or on his stance on monetary policy. Again, at Sintra, we did not learn much, a little bit like at the press conference. So I think he wants to put much more the focus on the rest of the committee and as to what he would describe as a good family fight.
Do you think that the format of the minutes will change much?
It's possible, we'll see, but the next minutes are going to, well, might be a little bit different, but it's still a minute, so it should be fairly as normal, and therefore that could be a lot more interesting than it normally is, because we should learn a lot more from that. But when it comes to the last NFP, it was certainly well below expectations, but still very consistent with our views that the monthly average pace should be around 50 to 75K. And on top of that, the break-even range we think is very low, so probably around 0 to 20K. So that means that even with this sort of print, you have an unemployment rate which should continue to decline. So it's still very much on track with our 4% target by the end of the year, which would mean that the Fed will have to re-engage with hikes.
OK, so the background to all of that, of course, is the geopolitics. And we're just watching on screen leaders arriving for this NATO summit in Turkey. We just saw the Bulgarian Prime Minister arriving there. If we can turn back to Europe, though, and really the politics, because we've been talking about the latest with Le Pen. She will be running in the 2027 presidential election. Surely that brings back fiscal risk in a bigger way. Are you expecting to see a reaction to her, this result on Le Pen at the European bond market open this morning?
So I would say, it was already in the mind of everyone that the RN is very much leading in the poll. So to some extent, it does not really change that. Yes, she is running. She's by far the most leading figure in that party. We've seen already spreads widening a little bit yesterday after the verdict. Maybe we grinned a little bit wider, but I don't think it changes much in the sense that the market was already reflecting that the RN is leading in the polls. And I think the focus for the market right now is also going to be onto the budget season. We are approaching that fairly soon. And there as well, you have some important risk for the deficit. So overall, it's rather leaning into a more widening of spreads.
OK, I also just want to refer to the latest that we've been hearing from NATO. We saw the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen on screen just there. She says she's heard the US presidents talking about Greenland. The US position on Greenland, she says, is unfortunately clear. Greenland is not for sale, says she, and we will, of course, defend the Kingdom of Denmark. I would not be able to defend my people without NATO. So those are the latest lines from the Danish Prime Minister. But Camille, I just want to come back to the UK because you were talking about the French budget. Of course, now we're looking ahead. I know it seems far away now, but to Andy Burnham's budget, if indeed he becomes the Prime Minister. Do you think that gilts will actually be quite calm now between now and the budget? Or will we see a bit of disruption if, for example, he picks Ed Miliband as Chancellor?
Yeah, so that's the main question right now. Who will be the next chancellor? I think if it's someone like Miliband, then it could reignite fiscal concerns. But if he chooses someone who's perceived to be more of a centrist, then it should confirm the commitment to the fiscal rules, in which case it might actually open the door to a little bit more gilt rally, because at the same time bond supply is going to decline between now and the budget. And so, therefore, usually that means that term premium in the bond market can collapse further. OK,
so maybe a bit of the left-wingness is already priced in?
It's possible, but at the same time, I would just highlight that if you look at the options markets, especially the FX market, where you can read what's priced in terms of event risks, nothing is priced around the Chancellor nomination. Right. Nothing is priced around the budget. So there is scope for more to be priced in. OK, well, we shall wait for that. Camille, thank you so much for coming in to see us. Camille de Courcel, Head of Developed Markets Rate Strategy and European Markets at BNP Paribas.
Well, diving into the French politics now. And as I say, French far-right leader Marine Le Pen heads outside the capital to La Sarthe today alongside her protégé Jordan Bardella. It comes after the National Rally's leader's embezzlement conviction was upheld, but judges handed her a reprieve on an election ban. The ruling clearing the way for Le Pen to lead her party into the next presidential elections in 2027.
So we will very quickly, Jordan Bardella and I, start this presidential campaign. You know that we have offered the French a duo that I believe is complementary, balanced, coherent, solid, and it's together that we will convince the French that what they are experiencing today is not a fatality, it is the consequence of toxic, harmful decisions that have been made by others, and that good decisions can change their future.
Let's get more now with Bloomberg's Caroline Connin, who joins us from Paris. Caroline, she's running. It's interesting, isn't it, that you've got both Farage in the UK and Le Pen in France, both on the far right of politics, well, on the right of politics, insisting that it's the people who'll have the final say on their finances, a reset moment of sorts for both. Do you think that Le Pen's conviction complicates her election bid in any way?
It's a surprising turn of events in the Le Pen saga. We saw at the Court of Appeal yesterday. Remember last year during the first trial, she was banned from running for office for 5 years. This ban was brought down to 15 months by the Court of Appeal. 15 months that the court said she has already served over the past 15 months. The issue for her was that the Court of Appeal also decided that she had to wear an electronic bracelet to do her jail term for the next year. And she had said before the verdict that she would not run, she would withdraw if she was forced to wear an electronic bracelet. So yesterday afternoon there was a crisis meeting at the National Rally, and at the end she decided she would appeal one more time because she can do so to the highest court in France, the Cour de Cassation, and that decision is not going to happen until probably early next year. So in the meantime, she doesn't have to wear this electronic bracelet. In the meantime, she can run for president. So that's what she announced last night on TF1, on the 8 o'clock news, the most watched news here in France. And she also said that she was running a double ticket with Jordan Bardella, who was supposed to be her replacement if she couldn't run. In fact, Jordan Bardella would be her prime minister if she is elected president next year. She unveiled her campaign poster, and she actually said that as soon as today, they will both be hitting together the campaign trail going to the South region on a market. So really, the campaign in France kicking off with this double ticket from the National Rally.
And what's the climate around those elections? Is anyone leading in the polls at the moment?
Of course, we had immediate reactions last night from both Edouard Philippe and Gabriel Attal, these two former prime ministers who have officially declared themselves as candidates as well for the next presidential elections, who both said that someone who's been convicted of embezzling EU public funds, or any public funds really, should not run for president. Philippe last night was on a different channel saying that what he wants to avoid is a far left versus far right, a Mélenchon versus Le Pen in the runoff of the elections next year. And if you look at the polls, I don't know if we're going to see this graphic, but Le Pen at the moment and Bardella have both been tested. Le Pen would be leading in the first round with more than 30% against both Edouard Philippe or Gabriel Attal, really. For campaign strategies, the interesting thing I may say is that Le Pen candidacy may be better news for Edouard Philippe than Gabriel Attal, because Gabriel Attal, 37-year-old, was kind of hoping for some sort of Gen Z battle between him and the 30-year-old Bardella, with both very present on social media, both attracting a younger audience. And with Le Pen as a main candidate, now this may bring back Edouard Philippe in the picture. Edouard Philippe, 55-year-old, Marine Le Pen, 57-year-old, so we might actually see a Generation X battle in this next election, unless, of course, this double ticket between Bardella and Le Pen manages to broaden the electorate of the National Rally.
Caroline, thank you so much for your coverage this week. That's Bloomberg's Caroline Conin in Paris. Well, as we talk about France and the Tour de France is underway, we shall discuss how legendary Italian bike parts supplier Campagnolo is trying to stay relevant. That'll be next, and we shall keep an eye, of course, on the latest NATO summit. Headlines, leaders arriving and speaking to the cameras, so we'll be across all the top lines for you from Ankara. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, the Tour de France enters its fifth stage today, and in decades gone by, a majority of competitors were riding bikes equipped with components from Campagnolo. But this year, it's just one team. The legendary Italian manufacturer has been largely squeezed out by rivals, and the company that once defined elite road racing is now fighting to stay relevant. Let's get more on this story with our Bloomberg Senior Global Business Editor, Anthony Palazzo. Good morning to you, Anthony. Just talk us through how big Campagnolo once was and really what's gone wrong for the company.
Yeah, well, they were dominant. In the 1970s and the 1980s, they had about 80% of the peloton in the Tour de France. They were founded in the 1930s. They have a history of innovation, and they're very well known for quality. And so what's gone wrong? It's been a combination of things. They started to fall behind on technology right around the late 1980s, early 1990s. They misjudged some trends like the popularity of mountain biking and electronic shifting, which is a big innovation, and also disc brakes. And so that's when they started to lose their position with bike manufacturers and also in the peloton, where riders are looking for every edge that can save them a few seconds.
But we know that races can be turned around. Is there any hope for the company to do the same?
No, it's a good question, and I think the answer is still out there. One of the lessons here is that scale matters, and you need resources to continually innovate and to bring new features to market and stay competitive, especially in pricing. And in all those ways, Campagnolo has been outflanked. So we'll see. One thing they really need to do is get in on the lower rungs, because that's where young riders they'll buy inexpensive bikes, but then they'll tend to stay loyal to the same brand over their whole lifetime. And so Campy's been missing out on a whole generation of riders.
OK, Anthony, it's a really interesting angle on the cycling story. Bloomberg Senior Global Business Editor Anthony Palazzo there. Thank you so much for bringing it to us. Now, let's turn to some other corporate news this morning. Bloomberg has learned that Microsoft is attempting to reduce costs by replacing OpenAI and Anthropic with its own artificial intelligence models in software products like Excel and Outlook. We're told that thousands of AI prompts in the spreadsheet and email applications are now being completed each week with Microsoft's internally built AI models. Elsewhere, staying with tech, sources tell Bloomberg that SK Hynix's $28 billion US share sale is already multiple times oversubscribed ahead of pricing on Thursday. The South Korean memory chip maker has drawn strong demand from institutional and tech-focused investors, and the deal could become the biggest ever US listing by a foreign company. And Samsung says that it's begun mass production of its most advanced data center storage drive, which is set for use inside NVIDIA's upcoming Vera Rubin platform. It says that the product delivers read and write speeds more than twice as fast as its predecessor. TrendForce says that Samsung had 35% of the enterprise solid-state drive market in the first quarter, followed by SK Hynix, Micron and Kioxia. And Bloomberg's been told that peak demand for Amazon's latest $25 billion bond offering reached $62 billion. That's about half the orders it attracted for an offering back in March, a potential signal of investor fatigue around AI-linked debt sales. Well, those are some of our top stories in tech this morning. We've got plenty more coming up for you. We'll head back to Ankara for our last few minutes together. This is Bloomberg.
When you have a ceasefire and Iran is basically violating the ceasefire, and we've seen what happened yesterday with ships being attacked, I think it is totally crucial that the US forcefully reacts.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte speaking a little earlier in Turkey at the NATO summit. And of course, geopolitics is back at the front of minds, not just because of the NATO summit, but also overnight because of the US strikes on Iran. Now, take a look at this. War-driven FX volatility has nonetheless been fading recently. We'll see to what extent the latest tensions reverse this trend. But flip the board again, and the dollar had been teetering on the back of markets pricing out the most aggressive of Fed tightening. It was already looking like the dollar correlation to oil could rise. Does this return of Iran tensions bring back a potential dollar breakout to the table? The peak of the correlation, of course, was when you had the peak of the war. But flip the board one more time, and two assets that are moving in opposite directions are oil and gold. Oil climbing, but gold losing its luster. And in fact, gold's recent underperformance quite notable, given the mood that we've seen in equities, risk off as it has been. But you can find all of these charts on the terminal at CHRT TV Go. You can find all the charts that we use here on Bloomberg TV. Now let's just take a look at the risk events on the docket for today. We can remind ourselves that the Fed minutes are coming up at 7:30 p.m. London time. Is the style of how they're delivered changing given the communications overhaul under the new Fed chairman, Kevin Warsh? We're also going to see UniCredit announcing results of the Commerzbank tender offer. And then, as we have been discussing throughout the programme, the NATO summit continuing in Ankara. We'll have coverage throughout the day. We'll be speaking to guests, including the Belgian Foreign Minister, as well as the Estonian Prime Minister as well. Well, they'll be covering all of this on the opening trade. It'll be up next, taking you all the way to the European cash open. Will we see a bond market impact from Marine Le Pen running in the French race? The opening trade next. This is Bloomberg.